Welcome to Platelet Allies. In this video, we will discuss the proteins that help mediate platelet aggregation and adhesion. We will discuss the following take-home points. Platelet adhesion is mediated by the platelet receptors GP1b95 and GP1a2a. On the endothelial surface, platelets use 1b95 to bind to von Willebrand factor and 1a2a to bind collagen. Platelet aggregation is mediated by the receptor GP2b3a. And platelets attach to each other using GP2b3a to attach to fibrinogen, von Willebrand factor, and fibronectin. Let's focus on platelet endothelial interactions. We'll start with some platelets and add endothelium. Let's now put a break in our endothelium in simulation of endothelial injury. Now let's take a closer look at the site of injury and magnify it. Beneath the endothelium, we find the subendothelial matrix. The matrix is made of connective tissue components, including microfibrils, laminin, and collagen. We will return later to collagen, a strong platelet agonist. Anchored to the endothelium and the subendothelial matrix, you will also find multimers of von Willebrand factor. As platelets approach the endothelium, they have receptors that recognize von Willebrand factor. This receptor is known as GP1b95. GP1b95 allows the platelet to bind VWF on the endothelium in a process known as adhesion. Once platelets are anchored to the endothelium, you may also note that beneath the endothelium are collagen fibrils. Platelets can bind to collagen using their receptor called GP1a2a. 1a2a is also known as integrin alpha-2 beta-1. Through this receptor, platelets bind to the endothelium in a process we're familiar with called adhesion. Now that platelets are anchored to the endothelium, another collagen receptor that recognizes collagen is known as GP6. GP6 binds with collagen, activating its properties as a strong agonist. To this end, platelets become activated. And because collagen is a strong agonist, platelets undergo release of alpha and delta granules in a process known as secretion. Secretion allows release of additional agonists such as ADP and serotonin, which cause nearby platelets to become activated. Let's now focus on platelet-platelet interactions. Let's start with activated platelets that have already adhered to the damaged endothelium. Activated platelets undergo a conformational change that exposes an important platelet receptor known as GP2b3a. GP2b3a is also known as integrin alpha-2 beta-3. The platelet alpha-2b beta-3 receptor recognizes fibrinogen, von Willebrand factor, and fibronectin. These proteins bind to the platelet GP2b3a receptor, allowing other platelets to bind until enough platelets are bound in a process called aggregation. That ends our discussion on platelet endothelial and platelet-platelet interactions. To summarize, platelet adhesion to the endothelium is mediated by the platelet receptors GP1b95 and GP1a2a on the endothelium. GP1b95 allows platelets to bind to von Willebrand factor, while GP1a2a allows platelets to bind collagen. Platelet-platelet interactions are mediated by the receptor GP2b3a. GP2b3a allows platelets to aggregate by attaching to fibrinogen, von Willebrand factor, and fibronectin. This brings us to the completion of Platelet Allies, friends you can stick to.